Senator Morgan is recognized.
Mr. President, 4 years ago, I kicked off an investigation of Big Pharma's tax practices, the dodges and tricks these hugely profitable multinational companies use to winnow down their tax bills. This was not very long after Trump's first tax breaks for corporations went into effect. My Democratic colleagues on the Finance Committee and I wanted to know exactly how sweet a deal Trump gave the biggest drug companies. What changes needed to be made to ensure these corporations paid a fair share? So far in the course of my investigation, I've released information on the tax practices of 5 major drug companies: AbbVie, Abbott Laboratories, Amgen, Bristol Myers Squibb, and Merck. The questions that I asked these companies were not very complicated. Essentially, what I asked came down to questions like, how big were your sales? Where did you make them? Where did you report your profits? Where did you stick your intellectual property? Did you actually pay taxes? Last year, I expanded my investigation with an inquiry to the company Pfizer. Pfizer initially resisted, but my staff and I were not going to let up. Finally, the company provided some answers to our questions. For example, we're going to get into those issues now, and I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a memorandum outlining records of my investigation relating to Pfizer's tax avoidance schemes, which will also be available immediately on the Finance Committee's website. I ask unanimous consent to have the report entered in the record now.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'm going to take a few minutes to walk through these findings and discuss why they're so important. And I'm very pleased to be joined by several of my colleagues who are also outraged about this tax dodging. Here's the upshot, Mr. President. My investigation has found that Pfizer carried out what could be the largest tax dodging scheme in the history of Big Pharma. The U.S. is the largest market for Pfizer's products. In 2019, the company sold $20 billion worth of drugs to American patients. Now, if you're following along on this discussion, you might be hoping to hear that Pfizer paid a reasonable rate of tax on those profits. I've got bad news for you and the American people. In that same year, Pfizer reported zero, not 1 red cent, in taxable U.S. profits. Through various tricks and games, Pfizer was able to shift 100% of its U.S. profits to foreign tax havens. This means that Pfizer dodged billions of dollars in federal income tax on its U.S. drug sales. There is every reason to believe it continues to do so. And thanks to the tax law Trump and Republicans passed in 2017, Pfizer doesn't need to keep the money stashed overseas. Pfizer can take this cash and pocket it with tax dodging schemes and turn it into stock buybacks, dividends, executive compensation. The list goes on. Now, there's an additional matter that's so disturbing. The company appears to be keeping some of its tax schemes hidden from view with what has been described to me as a confidential arrangement with the governments of Puerto Rico and Singapore. It's enough to leave you slack-jawed. So this is a Senate investigation that will have a direct impact on tax legislation, and Pfizer is hiding relevant tax information behind non-disclosure agreements. So colleagues, this is the 6th Big Pharma company where my investigation has found a staggering level of tax dodging. And these rip-offs don't happen by osmosis. They happen because Republicans have allowed them to happen. With the tax law they passed back in 2017, Republicans delivered to Big Pharma a tax break of more than 40%. From 2014 to 2016, the industry paid 19.6% on average. In 2019 and 2020, it paid 11.6%. Now, reasonable people watching at home might be thinking about how Republicans always claim to be worried about deficits and debt. Surely those Republicans would dial back what they did in 2017 and ask these huge profitable corporations to pay a little bit more to ease our fiscal challenges. If you think that's the case, wrong. So I want to bring my colleagues into this discussion momentarily, and I'll close by looking at the big picture as the Congress moves forward with this debate on taxes, health, child hunger, and more. Republicans are in control of the Congress and the White House, and they have locked Democrats out of the discussion. Somewhere here on Capitol Hill, there's a group of Republicans meeting right now behind closed doors, quietly planning the outline of their gigantic bill. Nobody in that room is talking about how to protect people who work for a living or how to get more fairness in the economy. The discussion they're having comes down to how big the handouts are going to be for billionaires and multinational corporations. How many tens of millions of Americans they're going to kick off Medicaid to pay for it? How many millions of kids are going to go hungry? How many hundreds of thousands of workers are going to lose their jobs? Republicans are doubling down on a broken system. And if you want to see that system in action, read our report, because you couldn't find a better example than Big Pharma's tax dodging. These are huge corporations that rake in enormous profits in U.S. sales because they charge astronomical prices in America. And then their stables of lawyers and accountants get to work on a whole bunch of fancy financial wizardry, taking advantage of loopholes and ripoffs planted by Republican lawmakers. Suddenly, the record profits get shipped overseas. Often the factories get shipped overseas. The jobs get shipped overseas. And the companies aren't paying anything close to a fair share of taxes. Typical Americans who pay tax out of every paycheck get ripped off. Republicans are not going to fix this broken, unfair system. In fact, they're gearing up to give tax-dodging corporations like these and their billionaire shareholders even bigger handouts. It's a scam. It's a ripoff on a national scale. The American people see it for what it is. We're going to keep calling it out, Senate Democrats, because this must not stand. So I'm very appreciative that my colleagues are joining me here on the floor. We have a very important member of the Senate Finance Committee to start, Senator Whitehouse, and I want to send this over to him. Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks, Chairman Wyden. This is a really important investigation, and it bears very exactly on the Republican tax scam that is being cooked up right now here in this Congress. Because one of the keys to the Republican tax scam that is being cooked up right here in this Congress is giving big corporations the ability to move their profits and even their jobs offshore, away from America, and get a tax break for doing that. And the total value of this tax break, the award to big corporations from Republicans for moving American jobs and profits offshore, is running at about $140 billion that other taxpayers are going to have to make up. Big Pharma is the big winner in this offshore tax scam. If you look at Big Pharma's numbers, most sales are to U.S. patients. They sell their pharmaceutical products to Americans. But when you look at their financial reporting, 75% of their profits are declared as coming from outside of the United States. So you got some funky math going on here, because we know that Americans are charged more for Big Pharma's drugs than people are overseas. They overcharge Americans. Americans pay the highest prices, and most of the sales are going to Americans who are paying the highest prices. So how is it that when most of their sales are going to Americans who are paying the highest prices, that's not where the profits are reported? The profits are reported from overseas, where they have fewer patients paying lower prices. How does that work? That works S-C-A-M, scam. And that's what the Republicans in Congress are trying to push forward into the future. Thanks to the terrific work of our chairman, we have some specific examples. The Republican tax scam went into effect in 2017. So they had to move pretty quickly. So we're looking at now 2019. How quickly did Pharma enjoy the benefit of this tax scam at Americans' expense? Well, AbbVie is one company. In 2019, it declared 3/4 of its profits, 3/4 of its sales to American customers, and essentially all of its profits offshore. They charged, as Pharma does, they charged Americans the highest prices, and they sold 75% nearly of their drugs to those highly priced American customers, and yet they claimed that all of their money came from the small fraction of their sales that they made at lower prices offshore. Again, SCAM. Who gets hurt? Well, who gets hurt is American workers, because very often the jobs go offshore along with the profits. So an American worker loses his job so that an American company can move that job offshore and pay some foreign person for the work that should be here, and gets rewarded by Republicans in Congress for a tax break for doing that. Who else gets hurt? Small businesses get hurt, because if you're running a small business, you can't set up this elaborate tax scam. You don't have the accountants, you don't have the lawyers, you may not even have the nasty motive to try to cheat your own government this way. So small businesses take it in the neck against the big businesses who can dodge their taxes through this complicated scam. And even some big American domestic companies like Rhode Island-based CVS, who are an all-American company, who don't fake their profits to be coming from Bermuda or the Cayman Islands or Singapore or wherever else, they suffer too, because they're in competition with the big multinationals that are playing shell and pea games with their profits to hide it from the IRS. So here's the racket. 1, you overcharge Americans. 2, you use the money that you earn from overcharging Americans to come to Congress and buy massive amounts of influence and get the Republican Party to do exactly what you want. And what you want is stage 3, the tax scam that lets you pretend you're making money offshore when you're really not. And then you save money by not having to pay taxes. And then you keep overcharging Americans, you keep buying Congress, you keep the tax scam going. It's rinse and repeat, and the big losers are Americans. Where it comes home is where the chairman did his outstanding work for Pfizer. $20 billion is what Pfizer sold in drugs in America. $20 billion is what Pfizer sold in drugs overseas. They charged more to Americans because Pharma charges more to Americans. We know that. And yet, Pfizer told the IRS that all of its profits came from offshore, all of it. And as a result, they got a huge, huge tax dodge. So whether it's AbbVie or whether it's Pfizer or whether it's the industry as a whole, we need to shut down this tax racket. It is not serving anyone. It costs American jobs. It's unfair to small businesses, and it cheats the regular taxpayers who pay their taxes honestly and can't pretend that the revenue they made off American customers is somehow magically appearing out of the Cayman Islands or some other foreign hideaway. Thank you very much, Chairman Wyden, for your amazing work.
Well said, Senator Whitehouse, and I want to get my colleagues into this next in order of appearance. Senator Van Hollen, and once again, I want everybody to understand that the 4 of us are going to continue to go after this colossal tax avoidance until it gets fixed, because the American people are getting ripped off. Senator Van Hollen.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Senator Wyden for bringing us together to shine a spotlight on one of the biggest tax heists in American history. The huge 2017 Trump tax giveaway to the very rich and the biggest corporations that came at the expense of everybody else in America, because everybody else in America has to pick up the tab for that giveaway to big corporations and the very rich. And that tax heist played out right here on the Senate floor. So why are we gathered here today to talk about something that happened here 8 years ago? And the answer is because it's about to happen all over again. In fact, this time maybe on steroids. And the American people need to know what will go down right here on the Senate floor in a matter of months if we don't stop it. So let's take a look at what Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress promised 8 years ago when they passed their big tax giveaway for the rich, and then look at what actually happened. They promised that tax cuts to the very rich would trickle down and somehow benefit everybody else in the country. Didn't happen. They promised that it would generate so much new economic activity that it would pay for itself. But that didn't happen. It added $1.5 trillion to our national debt. And if you extend that out another 10 years, that will be another $5.5 trillion on the debt. They promised that if they gave these benefits to big corporations like Pfizer and others in the pharmaceutical industry, that they would use their tax savings to provide raises of $4,000 on average to all of their workers. Didn't happen. I'll tell you who did get big bonuses. It was the CEOs and the executives. And they promised that they would use their savings, the corporations would use another part of their savings to reinvest in plant and equipment, and therefore help the whole economy. Didn't happen. What those big corporations did was use a lot of their tax savings for stock buybacks to jack up the price of their own stock. This plan that they passed, the Trump tax plan, passed 8 years ago, did something else. It provided that mechanism to help some of the biggest corporations in America duck their tax obligations to the American people by shipping their profits overseas and engaging in all sorts of scams. And today, we have even more evidence of the fact. And I want to, again, thank Senator Wyden and his team on the Senate Finance Committee staff for the report he is presenting today, because it is one of several reports he has done to expose how Big Pharma exploits the tax provisions of the 2017 Trump tax giveaway to magically make their profits from selling drugs here in the United States disappear. Somehow, all those profits made here disappear when it comes time to pay taxes. And that's how they miraculously reduce the amount of taxes they have to pay. And this report that the Senator Wyden and his team put together shows how this round-tripping scheme is how they do it. Round-tripping meaning you make your revenues here in the United States, at least 50% of the revenues in the case of Pfizer sales. But somehow when it comes time to pay your taxes, you have taken those profits and filtered them through all sorts of overseas schemes and entities to reduce that tax liability dramatically. And what the report shows is that while 50% of Pfizer's revenues are generated here in the United States, when it comes to booking its income for tax purposes, they show zero profit on their U.S. operations. And by playing that game, dramatically reduce their overall tax liability. This was facilitated by the 2017 Trump tax cuts, and it has allowed Pfizer to reduce its tax obligations by billions of dollars, cut its taxes by a whopping 40%, since that Trump tax scam was passed. And while big corporations win, everybody else loses. You know, American families, they can't use this round-tripping scheme. You can't somehow erase the taxes you owe on the earnings you make by running your earnings through various offshore schemes. Small businesses in America can't erase their American-based tax profits by using these round-tripping schemes, but the Donald Trump tax scam allows big corporations like Pfizer to do exactly that. And by doing that, they've reduced their overall effective tax in the pharmaceutical industry to about 11%, far less than the rates paid by most middle-class families in America. And when big pharma and big corporations shortchange America on the taxes they pay, they shortchange every citizen of this country. It means they're contributing less to modernize our infrastructure, less for public schools, less for our common defense. They become free riders on everybody else. So that's why we're here on the floor, to blow the whistle. And I will just close with this, Mr. President. I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again because we're heading toward our big debate here on this issue. And that's when on Inauguration Day, just down the hall here, President Trump was sworn in. He talked about a new golden age for America. Come to find out that when he's talking about a golden age, he's talking about a golden age for the people who were sitting right behind him on that platform when he was sworn in. Elon Musk and the billionaires. More billionaires in the Trump cabinet than any time in American history, by far. And so on the campaign trail, Donald Trump says he wants to go after the elites. On the campaign trail, he says, I'm going to look out for the forgotten Americans. Well, I'll tell you what. He has forgotten Americans unless they happen to be a big corporation or the head of a big corporation. And this is the big betrayal in action. And we are going to witness this big betrayal in action even more in the coming months here on the Senate floor if we don't stop it. And I want to thank Senator Wyden and his team for exposing exactly what will happen if we don't stop it. And I yield the floor.
I thank my colleague, and once again, you can hear his expertise from the Ways and Means Committee and the other body on these issues, and I thank him for his leadership. And our new member of the Finance Committee, Senator Welch, is here, and he'll have some remarks, and then I'll wrap up. But Senator Welch, thank you for all your leadership.
Senator from Delaware is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Wyden. Mr. President, when I talk to Vermonters, as I'm sure when you talk to Tennesseans, everyday hardworking people at the end of the month are struggling to pay their bills. It's expensive. And people are working really hard, but the cost of things is going up. Taxes are eating into their paychecks. And they don't understand how it is they can work so hard. In many families, it's two people working, and they still can't pay their bills. And there's a suspicion among a lot of folks I talk to that there's something wrong, and it's kind of a rigged situation. And what we're talking about today proves that the suspicion that Vermonters have about things being rigged, they're right. The second point I want to make at the outset is this issue, this specific example, provides such clarity that some of the worst things that cause the most suffering and the most economic insecurity are totally legal. Totally wrong, by the way, but legal. What did we find out with the Wyden report? We found that a major United States pharmaceutical company was able to make sales of $20 billion of its product in 2019 and report zero in income. It's zero in profits here in this country. What that ultimately means is that what Pfizer paid on its taxes, for taxes, despite this extraordinary profit, they paid less than the mailroom clerk pays in Social Security. They paid less than the pharmacist at the drugstore who dispenses the prescriptions. They paid less than the delivery drivers who may have brought these prescriptions to a person's home. They paid less than the employees of Pfizer, whether it was a lab technician or a clerk or anyone at that company. So Vermonters asked me, wait a minute, how is this? $20 billion in sales, extraordinarily profitable company, yet under the legal use of the tax code, they're able to report zero. Well, Mr. President, this is where, as much as I condemn Pfizer for manipulating and taking advantage of these legal loopholes, I say the United States Senate and the United States Congress bears enormous responsibility for allowing this legal loophole to be used. Pfizer and every profitable company should pay their fair share of taxes. That's all we're talking about. So when Vermonters, at the end of the month, are trying to look at how are they going to pay the bills that their checkbook balance won't cover, and they think the system is rigged, they're right. And one of the ways for us to unrig it is to attack this legal use of the tax code that was passed by this Congress. Now, this is worse than just the tax code, because other provisions have made Pfizer so profitable courtesy of the taxpayer. One of their major drugs, Eliquis, $791 million of taxpayer money was used in the research and development of it. Pfizer has that. It's been immensely profitable. And by the way, it's a good drug. It helps with strokes. But it's a wicked price. So here in the United States, if you're buying that drug, that cost $7,100. In Canada, it's $900. Japan, it's $940. In the United Kingdom, $760. In France, $650. So Vermonters asked me, wait a minute, our taxpayer dollars went into helping Pfizer develop that drug, $791 million, and we have to pay 6, 7, 8 times here in the United States than Pfizer sells it in other countries that are our peers. They think that's wrong, and so do I. Then you think about the protection that this Congress gives to intellectual property, and rightly so, where that pricing power that goes along with getting a patent is so abused in this country that it inflicts enormous economic hardship on individuals who have to buy it directly, on taxpayers who fund it through Medicare and Medicaid, and on our employers who really care about their employees and they want to provide employer-sponsored health care. But those premiums keep going up and up and up because of the pharma prices, and it means the raises are flat. That's not right. And then you have the fact that for pharma, we've created, as we should, publicly financed health care, Medicare, Medicaid, and employer-sponsored. So you have a situation for the pharmaceutical industry, and we're talking specifically now about Pfizer, where they get a guaranteed market, Medicare, Medicaid, employer-sponsored. They get a patent and then abuse the pricing power that goes along with it and sticks it to Americans, despite the fact that it's American taxpayers who funded so much of the basic research that went into developing this product that they put on the market. And then they end up with a tax code, courtesy of the United States Congress, that allows them to do what no corner drugstore could ever do. Basically, say that the sales they made weren't really made at the corner, in Burlington, Vermont, they were made at the corner in Singapore. Oh, and by the way, Pfizer worked out a deal with Singapore to get preferential tax treatment. And when they were asked what was that agreement, they had a non-disclosure agreement with Singapore to conceal from legitimate investigation about their tax liability what that deal was. So this is really shocking. But if any of us wonder why everyday folks who are showing up to do their job in all of the places of employment in your state and mine, and then at the end of the month, despite all their hard work, are having trouble paying their utility bill, and they just wonder, is this system rigged? They're right. In Exhibit A is what has been exposed in this report by the Senate Finance Committee and Senator Wyden. I yield back.
Senator Welch, thank you for your leadership, and it's great to have you on the committee. To wrap up, Mr. President, our investigation has found that Pfizer has carried out what could be the largest tax-dodging scheme in the history of Big Pharma. This Big Pharma ripoff is exactly what Republican senators should be rooting out in their tax bill, which is coming up. Instead, it looks like Senate Republicans may lock this outrage in permanently. All Americans who believe in tax fairness should join us in fighting any extension of this tax boondoggle. Mr. President, I yield the floor and I thank my colleagues.